Hello and welcome to my demo about the Robot Framework. In the following, I will show you what the Robot Framework is, how you can set it up, and how you can write and execute simple test cases with it. Robot Framework is a tool for automated test execution, and it is used for acceptance testing and also supports acceptance test-driven development and robotic process automation. It uses a keyword-driven testing approach, which makes it easy to write and understand the test cases as they are based on natural language, so they are human readable. You can create workflow tests, higher level tests, and data-driven tests. I will show you later one example for a workflow test and one example for a data-driven test. The framework provides a lot of different libraries, which you can see here, and the libraries provide predefined keywords which you can use to write your own test cases. There are also different tools which facilitate the test automation. I will show you later which library and tool I used for my test cases. The Robot Framework is based on a modular architecture. This means that the Robot Framework itself processes the data and generates logs and reports, and the provided tools and libraries handle the interaction with the target system. So for my test case, I decided to use the Selenium library, which is a web testing library for the Robot Framework. You can find here all predefined keywords which are offered by the Selenium library. You also find documentation about each keyword, so you can see which argument the keyword is taking, for example. So now I will show you how I set up my development environment and how I created my test cases. I decided to use PyCharm as development environment, but you can also use Eclipse or any other Python IDE. As the core framework is implemented in Python, it might be easier to use a Python IDE, but it is also supported by Java. So first of all, you need to create a new project, which I called Robot Framework. And then to use the Robot Framework, you need Python and pip. So I used the Python version 3.8 and the pip version 19. If you installed Python and pip, you can install the Robot Framework via pip. So pip install Robot Framework. And then also install Selenium. And if Selenium is installed, you can install by pip install Robot Framework Selenium library, the Selenium library, which offers you then the keywords you can use to write the test cases. If you go to File and Settings, you can also see under Project and Project Interpreter which interpreter you're using. And you can also see the installed packages, so you can check whether the packages are installed correctly. So here you can see pip, then the package Robot Framework, and the Selenium library. We can also go to plugins, and this is where we find the tools which are provided by the Robot Framework. So we have, for example, the IntelliBot, which I use for my project, and also the Robot Framework Support plugin. They both provide different features such as syntax highlighting or code completion support, which will help you to ease writing the test cases. After all necessary packages are installed, you can then start with creating a project. So I started with creating different directories. So I have the directory test suits, where I have all my robot files, and I have the directory resources, where I stored my resource file, which I will tell you later what this is. Then we can start creating our test suits as a robot file. So I created my test suits under the directory test suits, and here you can set up a new file, and this file you just name as your test suite is called, and then you enter .robot. So I already created some files. So for example, here the demo.robot file. So you can see here that every robot file consists of 4 different sections. So the first one is settings, then comes variables, the test cases, and the keywords. To create these sections, you can also use the intelligent code completion. So for example, if you enter settings, it will directly show you how to use this keyword. I will show you now how you fill these different sections with keywords and show you my test suite login valid and the test suite login invalid. So the first example is the test suite login valid, which first of all contains some kind of documentation under the first section settings. So here you can describe what the test suite is about. So for example, this test suite contains a single test case to verify that the user can log in with valid credentials. Then you have to state which library you are using. As I told before, I would like to use the Selenium library, which I state here. And you also have to install it, of course, in order to use it here in your robot file. Then you can also state what kind of resource you are using. So as I told you before, I have a resource directory where I have my resource file. And in this resource file, I store the variables and the keyword section. If you store the variables and keywords in a separate file, it has the advantage that you can reuse it for multiple test cases and test suites. Under the section variables, I can define different variables such as the browser I want to use or the web page I want to examine. So, as I said before, in my test suite, I want to see whether a user can log in with valid credentials. So I set my variable browser to Firefox as I want to use the Firefox browser. And I define the variable URL to be Stack Overflow as I want to see if the user can log in into the web page Stack Overflow. Then I can define some elements such as, for example, the login link. So if you go to the website, you can go to this link, examine it, and then copy directly from this element login the XPath. So here you can copy the XPath and then you can enter it here. So if I use the variable login link later, it will direct me to the element I copied under the XPath. Then I can also set variables for input fields, so example the email input. So if you go to the login page of Stack Overflow, you have here an email input field and password input field. You can also again examine this element and you will see that there is given some ID for this input field. So you can identify this element by the ID email. So same as for the text input field password and also the submit login button. After all variables have been set, you can go back to your actual test suite. So in my case, the login valid robot file, and then you can start creating your test cases. So here I want to create the test case to verify if a user can log in with valid credentials. So first I give the test case a name. So here I named it login valid, and then I define the different steps which should be executed during the test case. This test suite is therefore an example for a workflow-driven test, as it shows different keywords or elements which are executed as a workflow. All the yellow elements you can see here, for example, open login page, are either self-defined keywords or keywords which come from the Selenium library I showed you in the beginning. So close browser, for example, is a Selenium-defined keyword and will close the browser if you call it. In the settings, you will also define a suit setup and a suit teardown. So suit setup is what is done when you start executing the test script. So in this case, it opens the login page, which is a self-defined keyword and can be found in the resource file under the section keywords. So under the keyword open login page is again then defined different steps which will be executed when this keyword is called. So it first opens the home page, which is defined here. So open the browser with this URL and the browser I defined before, so Firefox. And then it will maximize the browser window, which is also a Selenium defined keyword, and will then go back here to click the login link, and then the login page should be open. Such keywords can be used to check or make sure that certain actions are really executed. So here, for example, with the login page should be open is defined that the title of the site should be login Stack Overflow. And only if this is fulfilled, the test case or the script will proceed with the next step. So after the login page is opened, I then define input username, where I enter my email address, and the input username can also be found in the resource file under here. So under the input username keyword, I say I have some kind of argument which is saved under the variable username. And then I have the Selenium predefined keyword input text, which will enter a text in some kind of input field. And I say I want to enter in the email input field, which I defined before, the variable username. So here I set this argument or the username to my email address and make the same with a password I created for Stack Overflow. Then after the username and password have been entered in the input fields, I submit the credentials with the keyword submit credentials, which is defined here in the bottom. So if I call the keyword submit credentials, it will click on a button, which is also defined under the variable submit login. This is then the last step of my test case I have here. And then the suit will tear down. So this is the last step my test script is doing. And here is specified that it should close the browser. And this is all I need to set up my test suite. And now I can try to run this test suite in the terminal. I will go to the terminal in PyCharm and then enter robot, and then I have to specify the location where my test script is stored. So in my case, the test suite directory, and then I have to specify the name of the file. So login valid.robot. As soon as I press enter, the script will then start running. So first of all, it will open the Mozilla Firefox browser and then go to the specified website, so Stack Overflow. And then go to the login button and enter the given email address in the email input field and the given password in the password field. After it entered both credentials, it will submit the login with a login button. Now you can see that the user is logged in correctly, and it will close the browser again. So after the script is ready with running, you can see in the terminal the test results. So you can see here the login valid test passed, and you have one test who passed and 0 failed. The robot framework also creates logs and reports, which you can see here. So for example, under the report, you can open it with some kind of browser, and it will show you all details you need to know about your test case. So here, for example, when the test started and when it ended, and all you need to know about the test. Now I will quickly show you my other test suite example, which is the invalid login. So it has the same structure as the valid login, has some kind of documentation. So this test suite contains test cases for invalid login. And the difference is that this is a data-driven test. So I have specified one test template, which will be used for, or will be called with different arguments. So I can test different scenarios or different data. So I also have a suite setup and suite teardown, and here I have the test template I talked about, so the login with invalid credentials should fail. This test template is specified under the keywords, and the structure is that I give the test case some arguments, so the username and the password, and it inputs or enters the username, the password, submits the credentials, and then I have the status that the login should have failed. So here I defined my different test cases. So here it's not only one test case, but multiple. And the only thing I enter in my test case are the arguments, which I have specified. So here I give some kind of email address which is invalid, but the valid password, or I give an invalid password but valid username, and this way I can test different scenarios. So I can also call this test in the terminal. So I enter again robot and the directory test suites, and then I specify the name with login invalid.robot and can execute the test script. It will then again call the browser and the website Stack Overflow. We'll then go to the So now it loaded, maximizes and goes to the login page, and then it tries out the different arguments it has been given in the test script. And if it finished all scenarios, it will again close the browser and the test results will be shown again in the terminal. So how you can see here, all the tests are passed. And the passing condition was here that the login should have failed. And this means that the page should contain an element, which is also Selenium predefined keyword. And I specified that it should contain some error message, which I stored under this variable in the resource link. So I said that when the web page contains this error message, then the test will pass as the login is failed. And this is also one advantage with using a resource file where you store all your variables and keywords. So you can reuse them in all your test cases or test suites you are creating. So these keywords and variables I defined here in the resource file, I could use in the login invalid file and also in the login valid file. So that's the reason why you should consider to make an extra resource file. So that was everything about the robot framework. I hope you could understand how to use it. And thank you very much for listening.